Hi everyone and welcome to Inside the Fairbanks Museum Planetarium. We are a few days away from June, which is insane to think about. But I hope you guys are doing well with this heat that we've been having. But just today we are going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart. I'm so excited to share it with you guys. So today we are on the north end of the balcony in the Fairbanks Museum, and we're going to be talking about sound waves, and music. So a little bit about me. I studied music in high school and I pursued it through college as just a hobby. So I actually played a number of instruments and I played in band for a while. So I'm excited to show things to you guys that have been very exciting for me, and let's get started. So when we think about music and instruments that we have, that we're talking about sound and how we're manipulating sound in the air around us. So just a quick revision of what sound is. Sound is vibrations that travel through the air. They can come from any source. And you actually can use sound in astronomy, but that's a whole different topic. Sound travels through the air at different frequencies, and we'll talk about what that is in a second, but it travels through the air and it hits our ears. Sound, like light, actually travels as a wave. So waves, we measure them by height, and that height is called the amplitude. And then we also measure them by their length, which is called frequency. So when something has frequency, that determines the pitch of something, meaning the note. So if something has a higher frequency, the noise is getting higher. So if you have like a and then a that's a different frequency. But if I'm doing versus that's talking about the change in the amplitude. So when you have when you're comparing sound, you're looking at the differences between the amplitude and the frequency. And so I'm going to show you something in a second of actually how that looks. So this is actually a really great way of showing what sound really looks like. We can't physically see it, but we can hear it. But when we hear about sound waves and light waves, we do know what the waves look like because we see waves in the ocean. So this is a great way of showing frequency. So when we are talking about frequency, we talk about peak to peak or trough to trough. And that is one wavelength or the frequency. And then when we're talking about the amplitude, we're talking about, here it's talking about the peak to the trough, but typically if we're looking at any sort of wave, we're looking at this like middle ground that hits right between, these are called nodes. And so when it switches from up to down, typically we look at from the peak to a node or a node to the bottom where the trough is. So when we're talking about sound, essentially we're living in a very musical world. When the leaves rustle in the wind, that's sound. With our cars, or maybe we never get to experience this, but if you're ever near a volcano and it begins to erupt, you can actually, before the big eruption begins, there's actually low rumblings that can be detected. But then as it becomes more frequent, that's when the sound gets louder. So it has a certain frequency, but the amplitude begins to get bigger and bigger, and then it becomes louder. So there's sound all around us, and we measure these sounds by decibels. And for example, so decibels are just a unit. So if I were to talk in a whisper, if I'm whispering like this, that is 10 decibels. A typical normal conversation for about 3 feet, which is not this difference between me and my phone, that is typically 60 decibels. And then if you're hearing a motorcycle, that's 100 decibels. And then fireworks is 130 decibels. So it's just 10 decibels shy of what can be called damage to your ears. But why do we call it that? Why is it that sound is so important to our ears, and why is there this thing called noise policy and noise pollution? I'll talk about that in a second. So our ears are so cool. There's this thing called a tympanic membrane, which is this like grayish purple thing right here. It's called a tympanic membrane, and it actually vibrates like this. So what you're hearing is actually, from me, my sound is coming out of wherever you're listening to, and the sound's traveling to your ear, and it's making your tympanic membrane vibrate. And it's vibrating at a certain pitch and a certain frequency. Well, the frequency and amplitude is very specific. And you're translating that in your brain very quickly into words, sounds, and your brain can tell what is words and things that are just other sounds that aren't really meaningful. So our brains take all of that and it goes into like different parts of the ear. And actually this is a really good example of what is in the ear. I'm not going to explain every part of it, but you can stop it here and look at it and take a look about how sound actually affects the ear. But, every animal is like that. Here we have some owls. This is a snowy owl. And you can actually see, sort of from here, there's this like little thing coming out of here. That's actually one of their ear holes. And it's pretty hidden with the snowy owl. They don't have ear tufts or anything. And you can see it on this side too. So this one's actually a little bit smaller, but they're pretty close in size, meaning like they're both kind of equal looking. But with the northern saw-wheat, where is it? So there's this one here on this size, and it goes like more upwards. And there's another ear hole right here. Don't want to touch it, right here. And it goes more downwards. And so these owls, the northern saw-wheat, are actually able to have a three-dimensional understanding of the world around them and hear all around them and be able to tell if there's an animal scurrying, if someone's hunting, be able to tell wind. It was really important. So if you know anything about music, you might have recognized something that I said about the ear, the tympanic membrane. And that sounds actually very similar to an instrument in the percussion family called the timpani. It's this big drum, and usually you have two mallets, that's the things that you hit it with, and it goes boom, boom, boom. So it actually is it's related to the Membranophones. So let me turn this around. These are instruments that you hit with your hand. So these membranes are stretched over a side, and as you hit it in different locations, it has either a harsher or softer sound, and you can make different sounds by sliding your hand across, hitting it, or just like playing with different parts of the body. And so the bigger stretch, the higher the sound, the less the stretch, the lower the sound. And drums have been used in every culture for very different things. Celebration, war, storytelling, worship, to just every aspect, music has been so important. And so we have, I'm not too well versed on different types of drums, but these are the drums that we have. So drums are called idiophones. And so those are drums that are percussion instruments that you shake or hit, maybe you stomp, like maybe dancing on the floor. So there's like this kokra rasp from India. I can't really tell what you would do with it, but I can guess that you can either hit it on the side, and you can see that it's like hollow in the inside, so the sound will actually travel out. But there's also like this perforated side where you could use this stick and like rattle it across, and it make like a do-do-do-do-do-do-do sound. We also have this rattle where it has something in the inside, and the rice or beans or whatever's in the inside, it hits this like outside of the gourd, and it creates a sound. This is a gong. This is a really, really cool gong. And you actually, essentially what you would do is that someone would be sitting in the middle. This would be flat on the ground, and they would play these instruments by hitting one of these things. And you may notice that they're not all really the same. They may not all be the same size. I could be wrong, but they look to be different sizes to me. And so each of those gongs has a slightly different sound, or maybe they're different altogether. And based on how hard they hit, or what they hit it with, the pitch could be the same, but the timbre or the way that it sounds is different. It's the same thing with xylophones. You may have noticed if you've ever played with a xylophone or heard it yourself, each of these pieces of wood are cut a specific way, and they have a specific length, and that determines just like the note that's being played. But depending on how hard you hit it, the loudness of it changes, or it's also called a dynamic. And depending also what you hit it with, it can affect how that actually comes out in sounds. It can be a harder sound, it can be a softer sound, and it's the same thing with bells too. But typically you just shake them. And cymbals, when cymbals or a gong gets hit by something, it vibrates and it shakes, and that's what generates the sound. So another way that you can actually generate sound and manipulate vibrations are with string instruments. So one good example is this fiddle from China. So there is these spikes at the top. Well, they're not spikes, but they're like tuning forks, not forks, but you spin them and it tightens the string to however you want it to. And then you would press down on the string, and at the same time you would use that bow and bring it across to make the string shake. And that's what's causing the vibration. When you see a guitar or this early 20th century lyre from the Middle East, you're plucking it, and that's what makes the vibrations start for these instruments. Same thing with the harp. We know that harps and guitars are cousins, and you don't bring a bow across. You are plucking it or strumming it, and that generates a vibration. And so the string, essentially, when you hit it or something, it goes like this, back and forth, and that generates a sound. So there's this kind of guitar, or we call it a lute. This is a lute as well. Same thing here. And then we also have this beautiful stringed instrument here too. So you'll note that it has, if you ever played, guitar or violin or another string instrument, it's got the bridge at the top, and then it's got like these different sections where you know what the pitch is going to be. But this instrument would be laid down flat. You can tell from the feet here, here, and at the top. And so it'd be laid down flat, and it probably was either played like strumming or plucking, or maybe there was a bow. We don't necessarily know, but that is generally how the sound waves would be produced. So that is one very physical way to actually see how sound waves are moving back and forth. And if you can play with a rubber band, you'll be able to see that as well. Changing the tenseness of the rubber band and plucking it, and you'll be able to see it moving back and forth really fast. The last stop are the aerophones, or also known as woodwinds and brass or other wind instruments. Typically just called wind. Very commonly in history, we've seen trumpets, flutes, or clarinets, oboes. We also know of the pan flute. It's actually very similar to an organ, but just differently. Essentially, this is also like the early, the later flutes and the modern flutes that we have now, where you hold it, like pan is in this picture, you hold it across, like straight up, and then you blow air across, and it plays a specific pitch, or sound, or note. And so smaller ones, it doesn't really matter the size of the hole. It just matters the length of the material that you're using. So that's one type of flute. This is another type of flute. This is a very early style of flute where it's probably played like the typical oboe, clarinet, reeded instrument. So this oboe here is played downward, so that is probably how these early flutes were played. This clarinet here and this clarinet here were probably put into the mouth like a recorder, and then each of these holes you would do a specific fingering, and that would tell the sound which way to come out, and it changes the notes, and so it creates music. And this is also an early flute. I was talking before with someone explaining how I'm not sure if this flute would have been played sideways like the modern flute is now, or if it would have been played down like a clarinet or oboe. So it's so interesting how things look similar but also very different to instruments now. The ones that have retained their look over time, those also have a very unique way of sounding, versus the more classical Western instruments that have their own different type of sound, depending on the material that they're made from. So thank you for joining me today and talking a little bit about music and sound, and getting to look at these instruments that are very near and dear to my heart as someone who plays flute and piccolo and guitar. I played violin for several years going into high school. So it's very nice to join you guys, and we'll see you here next week.
Okay, thank you, Hannah, for that very thorough introduction to the musical instruments exhibit in the balcony of the Fairbanks Museum. I'm going to just talk very briefly about a couple of the instruments that we have and in the display, and relate them to a couple of other things. So I'll start here by sharing my screen with you. So there were a couple of instruments in the display, including the large circular gong with a series of different gongs in it from Thailand that was purchased at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 for the Fairbanks Museum either by Franklin or for Franklin Fairbanks to become part of the early collections of the museum. So it's one of the early things that was purchased after Franklin donated his personal collections to found the museum. And they were continuing to add things, including some of these things that you see here that were purchased at the exposition in 1893 from the Central Association of Japan. They bought a crystal ball, and from the Royal Norwegian Commission, they bought two reindeer antlers and a pair of wooden skis. It doesn't say wood here, but we have them in the collection still, and they are wood. And here, the second item is actually the large circular gong, which is a series of gongs. You can see it was purchased for $40 in October, early November of 1893. And the World's Columbian Exposition was actually a place where a number of collections were acquired new things for them for different museums. And one museum was actually founded based on the exposition. That is the Field Museum in Chicago. They actually started planning for that before the exhibition opened, and that a large part of the collections would be, or the things displayed there would become part of the collections at the Field Museum. So this picture on the left here is actually the exhibition buildings, many of which were built for the event, as often was the case with these world's fairs. And these two pillars here are a pair of pillars from the Haida Native American people from British Columbia, and were displayed at the Columbian Exposition, and were then purchased for the Field Museum as part of 50,000 objects that were from the fair that became the founding collections of the museum. And the museum was first actually called the Columbian Museum of Chicago, before it was pretty quickly actually renamed for the first major donor, which was Marshall Field. And back to the Fairbanks Museum, you can see here in this image, which we can date actually by some of the things that we see in the picture. You can see way back at the other end right here is the gong piece that we were talking about, which was purchased in 1893. So we know this picture was taken after then, but also before 1907, which is when this moose grouping diorama was enclosed in its own case to help protect it. So these old images are great for showing how things used to be displayed at the museum, and also how they were viewed by people of the time. And things like this gong were more of a curiosity type object rather than cultural object to help understand and tell us something about the people who made it. And that fairly quickly changed after the museum was founded. And now it's definitely something that we can use to help understand how people lived and different cultures a little bit, as you can see in this instruments exhibit. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.